Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into a really fascinating conversation. Donald Trump's interview on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast. You've given us a whole bunch of excerpts, and we're really excited to unpack the highlights and explore the insights that resonate most with you.
Yeah, this interview covers a lot of ground politics, media, even UFOs. We'll navigate through it all, highlighting the most intriguing aspects and connecting them to the bigger picture.
Okay, so you shared a clip where Rogan points out how figures like Oprah Winfrey and The View hosts were initially quite favorable towards Trump. They even kind of encouraged him to run for president, but then as soon as he actually entered politics, everything flipped. What struck you about this shift from positive to negative coverage as Trump entered politics?
It speaks to a larger phenomenon, I think, where perceptions of individuals can change so dramatically based on their political affiliations. The interview really highlights how political aspirations can make someone a target of intense scrutiny and criticism, you know? It's almost as if by choosing a side, you automatically inherit a whole set of pre-existing judgments and biases from both supporters and opponents.
It's almost like there's this before and after picture. Before politics, Trump was this celebrity businessman. He was even appearing on Oprah after he became the center of a media storm.
Exactly. And what's even more fascinating is that Rogan mentions a poll conducted years before Trump even officially announced his candidacy, where he was already polling ahead of Mitt Romney. So it kind of suggests that the potential for that shift, that before and after, was already there lurking beneath the surface.
Wow, that's a really telling detail.
Yeah.
So Trump leaves behind this successful career, including his hit show The Apprentice, and steps into the presidency. You flag this section where he talks about the sheer volume of appointments he has to make 10,000, he says. It paints a picture of immense pressure, danger, constant threats, scrutiny. Can you even imagine living under that kind of stress 24/7?
It really humanizes the role of the president, you know? We often focus on the policy decisions, but it's so easy to forget the personal toll that it takes.
Yeah.
It's not just about governing, it's also about navigating this complex web of relationships and potential dangers. The interview reminds us of the incredible weight of responsibility that a president carries.
He even mentioned 2 assassination attempts made against him, which were largely downplayed in the media. It makes you wonder what other behind-the-scenes challenges a president faces that we're not always privy to.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that there's this whole other layer to the presidency, a side we rarely see.
So Trump makes some pretty strong statements about third parties and independent candidates. He basically calls running as an independent nonsense, claiming it just won't work in the current two-party system. He even brings up RFK Jr., someone he seems to admire but believes just can't succeed outside the established parties. Did this perspective surprise you at all?
Not really. It's a pretty pragmatic take on the limitations of third parties in the American political landscape. I mean, the two-party system is so deeply entrenched that it makes it incredibly difficult for anyone to break through.
Yeah.
To get elected, you need congressional support. But to get congressional support, you need to be part of the established system. It's a bit of a catch-22.
Yeah, it's like he's saying you're stuck. Either you work within the system with all its flaws, or you're shouting from the sidelines. So this raises the question, is it more effective to try to challenge the system from the outside or to work within it to try to push for change?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And there's really no easy answer. Both approaches have their own sets of challenges and potential rewards.
Now, this next part I found pretty relatable. Trump admits to making some bad personnel choices during his presidency, specifically mentioning John Bolton. He even tells a story about a friend who warned him about Bolton's character, but he'd already hired him.
Oh yeah, it's a great example of how difficult it can be to truly judge someone's character, especially in the world of politics where image and perception are so carefully crafted.
Absolutely. He talks about how people in the public eye often have these carefully crafted personas and rehearsed answers. It makes it almost impossible to discern their true intentions.
It touches upon the complexities of trust and judgment in positions of power. You know, you're constantly surrounded by people vying for influence, and it's this constant battle to try to figure out who's genuine and who's playing a role.
It's not just politics, right? I think we've all experienced that in our own lives, trying to figure out who to trust and who's being authentic.
Absolutely. It's a universal human experience magnified on a grand scale in the world of politics.
Okay, here's where things get a little heated. Trump and Rogan dive into the debate over energy sources, and surprisingly, Trump expresses concerns about nuclear power. Instead, he seems to really favor fossil fuels and even criticizes windmills, calling them ugly. So Trump's skeptical of nuclear power really dislikes windmills. What do you think about his arguments? Do you agree that we should stick with fossil fuels even with all the environmental concerns?
It's a snapshot of the ongoing energy debate, where concerns over safety and aesthetics kind of clash with these practical considerations and environmental impacts. I mean, there are valid arguments to be made on all sides.
Yeah, it's interesting how he contrasts the potential environmental damage from electric car batteries with the vast oil and gas reserves that we have here in the U.S.
Well, and this is where the conversation gets really complex. It's not just about picking one energy source over another, but about really understanding the trade-offs and trying to find that balance that works for everyone.
So on one hand, you have the potential for clean energy with renewables, but on the other, there are concerns about their reliability and the environmental impact of their production. It's a tricky dilemma.
Exactly. And then you factor in nuclear power, which can be very efficient and clean, but it carries the risk of potentially catastrophic accidents. There's no easy answer.
Okay, this next topic is sure to spark some debate. Trump calls out what he sees as woke bullshit and claims that young people are increasingly rejecting it. He even cites his success on TikTok as evidence of this shifting political landscape among younger generations. Are you seeing any of these trends playing out in your own circles?
It's a really interesting observation about the evolving cultural and political values across generations. I mean, the term woke has become quite divisive, and it's fascinating to see how different age groups respond to it.
Yeah.
What one generation sees as progress and awareness, another might view as excessive or even oppressive.
It's almost like a generational clash of values, right?
Exactly, and Trump seems to be tapping into that sentiment, suggesting that there's this growing backlash against wokeness, particularly among younger people. It'd be interesting to see how this dynamic plays out in the coming years.
He even mentions his son Barron, who keeps him informed about popular internet culture figures. I can only imagine the dinner table conversations in that household.
Uh-huh. I'd love to be a fly on the wall for those.
Okay, buckle up, because this is a sensitive one. Trump doubles down on his claims that the 2020 election was crooked. He criticizes voting machines, mail-in ballots, and even suggests that voter suppression tactics are used to discourage turnout. This is an incredibly important topic. It goes to the very heart of our democratic processes. How do these claims align with your own views on election security?
It's crucial to approach it with a balanced perspective, examining evidence and considering multiple viewpoints.
It's definitely a topic that elicits strong opinions on both sides. And it's essential to remember that maintaining trust in our elections is so fundamental to a healthy democracy.
Absolutely. And I think part of maintaining that trust involves engaging in open and honest conversations about potential vulnerabilities in our voting systems while also being wary of spreading misinformation or unfounded accusations.
He points out that he won Wisconsin in 2016, despite trailing by 17 points in a poll just the day before. So he uses this as an example to suggest that polls can be unreliable and potentially misleading.
It's true that polls aren't always accurate predictors of election outcomes. I mean, they are snapshots in time, and they can be influenced by various factors.
Okay, let's talk about the media. Trump is known for his adversarial relationship with the press, and in this interview, he doesn't hold back. He criticizes the media as a propaganda arm for the Democratic Party, claiming he consistently receives negative coverage. He even jokes that Kamala Harris would be laying on the floor if she had to do Rogan's podcast. What are your thoughts on the role of the media in shaping public opinion?
This highlights the ongoing debate about media bias and its influence on how we perceive events and individuals. It's so important for us as consumers of information to develop critical thinking skills and really evaluate the sources that we rely on.
He seems to be suggesting that there's a lack of objectivity in media coverage, especially when it comes to political figures.
Right. And this perception of bias is something that's become increasingly prevalent, especially in the age of social media and the 24-hour news cycle. It's important to remember that all media outlets have a perspective, and it's up to us to be aware of those perspectives and consume information critically.
It's interesting how he contrasts his own experiences on Rogan's show with what he perceives as the hostile environment he faces with traditional media outlets.
It speaks to a broader shift in how people are getting their news and information now. Traditional media is facing challenges from independent platforms and online personalities, and it's creating a more fragmented and polarized media landscape.
Moving on to immigration and border security, Trump expresses some very strong opinions. He criticizes current immigration policies, advocating for tighter border control, and even uses very harsh language to describe certain individuals, calling them savages and imbeciles. It's certainly inflammatory rhetoric. You flagged this part of the conversation, and it's definitely a tough one to unpack. How do you navigate these complex issues and reconcile Trump's language with the human aspect of immigration?
Immigration is a multifaceted issue with economic, social, and humanitarian dimensions.
Yeah.
It's a topic that often evokes strong emotions, and it's crucial to approach it with empathy and understanding.
He paints a picture of a border in crisis with human trafficking and uncontrolled immigration. But it's important to remember that behind the statistics and the political rhetoric, there are real people with complex stories and motivations.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to acknowledge both the challenges and opportunities associated with immigration, you know? We need to have honest conversations about border security while also recognizing the contributions immigrants make to our society. It seems like finding that balance is key, addressing security concerns while also ensuring humane treatment and recognizing the value that immigrants bring.
Exactly. And that's where the conversation really needs to focus, moving beyond the divisive rhetoric and finding solutions that work for everyone.
Speaking of things that need solutions, Trump drops a bombshell towards the end of the interview. He casually mentions UFOs and even claims that he's been briefed extensively on the subject. He drops a few hints but doesn't go into specifics, leaving us all hanging with a major cliffhanger.
It's certainly a tantalizing tease. The idea of a president being privy to classified information about potential extraterrestrial contact is both fascinating and a bit unsettling. And we're back, ready to dive a little bit deeper into some of the more intriguing points that emerged from Trump's conversation with Joe Rogan. You know, one thing that really stood out to me was his discussion of tariffs. You highlighted some excerpts where he seemed to really view them as this powerful tool for negotiating with other countries, almost like a secret weapon in his arsenal.
He definitely presented a very assertive approach to international trade,
Yeah.
emphasizing the importance of putting America's interests first.
Yeah, he gave that example of calling up Emmanuel Macron about France taxing American companies. He basically threatened to slap a 100% tariff on French wines and champagnes if Macron didn't back down. Can you imagine suddenly your favorite bottle of French wine doubles in price?
It's a very bold tactic, and he claimed it worked, stating that Macron quickly reversed course.
Yeah, he also mentioned using tariffs to address security concerns, even claiming that he stopped wars simply by imposing tariffs. It's a pretty unconventional way of thinking about foreign policy.
It is. It suggests a more transactional approach to international relations, I think, leveraging economic power to achieve geopolitical goals. So instead of sending troops or engaging in diplomatic talks, he's essentially saying, hit them where it hurts their wallets.
He even boasted about getting hundreds of billions of dollars from NATO countries that weren't contributing their fair share. It's clear that he sees financial strength as a key to national security.
He consistently frames international relations as this zero-sum game, where one country's gain is another's loss. It's a very America-first perspective, prioritizing American interests above all else.
Speaking of global power dynamics, Trump had some interesting things to say about China. You pointed out this section where he's both critical of China's trade practices, but also seems to have this grudging respect for their leaders.
It's a complex relationship. On one hand, he criticizes China's economic policies and accuses them of manipulating their currency. But on the other hand, he acknowledges their economic prowess and even refers to President Xi Jinping as brilliant.
Yeah, he makes the point that Xi controls 1.4 billion people with an iron fist, which certainly doesn't sound like a compliment. But at the same time, it seems like he recognizes the skill and discipline required to govern such a vast and complex nation.
It's a reminder that global politics is rarely black and white. There are often these competing interests, conflicting values, and this constant struggle for power and influence.
It sounds like he views China as both a rival and a force to be reckoned with.
Exactly. He seems to acknowledge China's growing influence on the world stage while also expressing this determination to ensure that America remains the dominant global power.
Now let's talk about Russia. Trump's relationship with Russia, and particularly with Vladimir Putin, has been a subject of intense scrutiny and controversy. In the interview, he maintains that he had a good relationship with Putin and claims that Putin would never have invaded Ukraine if he had been president.
It's a bold assertion. He argues that Putin didn't respect Biden and that the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan emboldened Putin to take action.
He even claims that he had personal conversations with Putin, warning him against invading Ukraine. He suggests that he used leverage and established a level of deterrence that Biden lacked.
It's difficult to assess the validity of those claims without access to classified information or direct testimony from Putin himself. However, it's certainly an interesting perspective on the geopolitical dynamics at play.
He also criticizes the Biden administration's handling of the Afghanistan withdrawal, calling it a disaster that emboldened America's adversaries.
It's clear that he sees strength and decisiveness as essential qualities in a leader, And he believes that Biden's actions projected weakness on the world stage.
Okay, this next part is a bit of a wild card. Trump hints at the possibility of his children entering politics, specifically mentioning his son, Donald Trump Jr. He even suggests that his daughter Ivanka could be a potential running mate for him.
It raises the intriguing possibility of a Trump dynasty emerging in American politics.
It's a bit like a political reality show.
Right. And it would certainly be a fascinating development, potentially reshaping the Republican Party and American politics for years to come.
It makes you wonder what impact growing up in such a politically charged environment has had on his children, and whether they're truly interested in pursuing their own political careers.
It's certainly a unique upbringing, and it would be interesting to see how their experiences and perspectives might differ from their father's.
All right, now for a lighter topic, Trump's love of UFC. You found this section where he talks about being a longtime fan of mixed martial arts and even tells a story about helping Dana White secure early venues for UFC events.
It's a reminder that even presidents have hobbies and passions outside of politics.
Yeah, he seems to really enjoy the spectacle of it all.
Yeah.
The intensity of the fights and the larger-than-life personalities involved.
It's interesting how he compares the UFC to boxing, arguing that boxing is actually more dangerous due to the weight-cutting practices. It seems like he has a genuine concern for the safety of the fighters.
Yeah, it's not something you'd expect a president to be discussing, but it adds a layer of humanness to his persona.
It's a reminder that even the most powerful people in the world have personal interests and preferences that shape their worldview.
We've covered a lot of ground in Part 2, touching on tariffs, China, Russia, the possibility of a Trump dynasty, and even his love of UFC. But there's still one more major thread we need to untangle, that UFO cliffhanger. We'll be back in Part 3 to explore those tantalizing hints about extraterrestrial contact. Stay tuned. Okay, we are back for the final part of our deep dive, and we can't leave without addressing the elephant in the room, or should I say, the spaceship in the sky.
Yeah, let's dive into those tantalizing hints about UFOs and potential extraterrestrial contact that Trump dropped on Rogan.
It's not every day that you hear a former president casually discussing aliens on a podcast. It definitely made me raise an eyebrow.
It's a topic that's always been shrouded in mystery and speculation, so to hear Trump even acknowledge it, let alone claim to have been extensively briefed, is pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah, he even says to Rogan, a lot of people ask me that question. So it seems like this isn't just some passing interest for him. It's something that people genuinely want to know about.
Yeah, it speaks to our collective fascination with the unknown,
Yeah.
the possibility of life beyond Earth and what it might mean for humanity. That feeling you get when you look up at the stars and wonder, are we alone? This taps right into that.
He was pretty tight-lipped about the specifics of what he was told, but he did drop a few hints that you picked up on. He seemed to agree with Rogan that it's reasonable to believe that life exists on other planets.
Right. He said there's no reason not to believe that Mars and other planets could harbor life. It's a pretty significant statement coming from someone who had access to, top secret intelligence.
And it's not just talk.
Yeah.
You flagged this part where he describes witnessing something remarkable during a flight on Air Force One. He talked about seeing a bright light that moved with incredible speed and precision.
Yeah, he described it as landing perfectly like glass and emphasized the advanced technology behind it. I mean, can you imagine seeing something like that out your window at 30,000 feet?
It's hard not to let your imagination run wild with those kinds of detail.
Yeah.
Is he talking about advanced military technology? Or is he hinting at something truly extraterrestrial?
That's the million-dollar question. He leaves it open to interpretation, which is both frustrating and fascinating.
I know. It's like he's giving us just enough to spark our curiosity, but not enough to satisfy it.
Yeah, the ultimate tease. And it leaves us pondering the implications, What does it mean if a former president is suggesting the possibility of alien contact? How might that knowledge impact our understanding of the universe and our place within it?
It's almost like he's opened this Pandora's box of questions that we're now left to grapple with.
And that's what makes this interview so thought-provoking. It goes beyond the typical political discussions and delves into these deeper existential questions that we as a society haven't fully confronted yet.
It's a reminder that there's so much we don't know, and so much that's still out there to discover.
Absolutely. And perhaps that's the most profound takeaway from this deep dive, It's not just about Trump's views on politics or energy or even UFOs. It's about that sense of wonder and curiosity that he sparks. It's about challenging our assumptions and expanding our horizons.
It's about embracing the unknown and continuing to ask those big, important questions about our place in the universe.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe someday we'll have those answers. But for now, the mystery remains and the conversation continues.
And that's a wrap on this deep dive into Donald Trump's conversation with Joe Rogan. Thanks for joining us as we explored these fascinating and often perplexing topics.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.